Hey everyone. So I'm literally on I-5 right now, northbound around Shasta, and I'm in this total gridlock traffic. So may as well make a video. We have today, Neptune stationing direct in Pisces. So let's talk about that. Whenever a planet stations, I always like to speak about it because it's a significant event. It's one of those clear markers and turning points within consciousness, and it's always worthy to give it some attention. So let's first review, what does it mean when a planet is stationing direct? Let's remember that all planets have these retrograde cycles, and that these retrograde cycles, in a way, are reflecting back upon our conditioned consciousness, where we expect things to be a certain way. This is how life is, this is how I am, this is what I expect to be. Our own internal conditioning. And so the retrogrades are this period of time for all planets where the cycles of life unfold and work themselves, and we're really invited to let go a little bit and to step away from the patterns that we are familiar with, what we're expecting out of life, so we can cultivate a little bit more intelligence and awareness of what's actually happening, what life wants to do. And when a planet begins stationing direct, it's at the end of the retrograde period. So it's sort of like you've just been on this journey. There's been a lot of growing and learning and adopting and accommodating. And the direct motion is now, okay, time to move forward, that time to glean this wisdom piece, this gem of knowledge and understanding that you may have earned during this time. But we have to really think about how the planets are us. There's no separation in this reality. So the planet, it's just stopping, right? Neptune's just stopping. And then it's picking up speed. So what's happening with us? There's like a slowing down, and in that space, there's something new emerging. So we're invited to connect with that. There is an active co-creative process with these cycles. So we are connecting with what's unfolding right now. So whenever a planet moves direct, there's always this opening energy inside of us that really invites our participation. It's as if there is a train to catch, but it's not moving yet. I mean, we might not even know where that train is or which train to get on, but there's just this sense of, okay, now it's time to glean wisdom and to integrate and begin to apply all that I have learned and to move forward with it in a new way. And we always see that when the planet begins to pick up speed and it moves direct, there's a new quality of embodiment that often manifests in our lives. Of course, these cycles can go completely ignored as well. It's never really a promise that we're going to have any particular kind of experience. There's that mystery of our choosing, which is an untouchable aspect. It's not in the stars. So let's talk about Neptune direct. Neptune in general really speaks to our oneness with Creator. We often hold this illusion that I'm on my journey and you're on your journey, and that we're these different elements manifesting in life. And on one level, that's true. And we're operating in time and space, and that level of reality is existing, but it's not all of existence. And Neptune teaches us that there's only reality, there's only existence. And there's nothing that isn't in existence. Like, there's nothing that is not real. Like, there's no contradiction to reality. And if we want to define reality as love, as God, as truth, that's all that there is. And the suffering that we experience within the Neptune archetype is where we try to impose a construct of reality onto reality. And because reality is just so open to itself, it's not trying to prove anything, it's not defending itself. And so it's a perfect mirror. We're going to get back whatever we're putting onto it. It's not going to say, you're right, you're wrong. There's just this wide open space for us to play out our illusions. But within our own selves, our own inner navigation system, we come back to, I seem to be suffering a lot, or I'm not happy, or, as it says in A Course in Miracles, I can choose peace instead. So with this Neptune journey, we actually develop a humility and an awareness that there's something beyond the illusions and the efforts that we perpetuate to forge a sense of happiness in our own lives. There's something just beyond that. And I want to know what that is. I want to know what true peace is like. I was recently in a medicine ceremony, and I was just moving through a lot of energy. And this one man came up to me and said, "Blessings on your healing, brother." And that really threw me off. Like, blessings on your healing, brother. Just really threw me off for a while. And I thought about it. What I realized was I wasn't experiencing my own work. You know, in these medicine ceremonies, you work with these indigenous medicines, you might be purging a lot and going through a lot of physical or emotional cleansing. And the whole time that I'm going through that, I wasn't thinking like, this is my healing. I was just aware of this is our healing. That was my whole experience. And every single time it became about me, I suffered. Whenever I made it about like, I'm figuring something out, right? I'm healing something, it felt so wrong. Because the very thing that I was healing was that sense of separation. And I was humbled to remember through that experience and through what he told me, blessings on your healing, brother, for me to remember that I'm not doing this alone. There's no alone. And that when someone comes to me for a session, it's not I'm serving them. There's an aspect of that, but that's not what's actually happening. It's we're healing together. And on our soul journey, we all are given the assignments. We're all put in the positions that we need to be put into. Sometimes as the giver, sometimes as the receiver. The forms change. You know, there's also this teaching in A Course in Miracles that miracles are given by those who temporarily have more for those who temporarily have less. And moment to moment, relationship to relationship, we find ourselves in different positions. But when we engage in these sacred relationships, whatever our role might be it the teacher, student, giver, receiver, we are sharing the healing together. And so for me to remember that when I'm in service with someone, I'm doing a session with someone, to be grounded and remember in that devotional space that this is our healing, and everything they bring forward, everything that I get to say, it's not separate from me. And that's so beautiful to remember that. We have this notion of mundanity in Neptune. And the mundanity is basically like, yeah, you know, a bunch of anonymous cars that are kind of watching me on I-5. And, you know, there's no relation, right? You're driving through a highway and there's no sense of connection to the people necessarily. We're all sort of anonymous figures. And Neptune is that. Neptune is anything where you become an anonymous figure, right? One of many people on a car, on a highway, or a soldier in an army, or a nurse in a hospital, or a patient in a hospital, or whatever, right? Or the water in the ocean. But then there's this magical ingredient where the mundanity can turn to profundity, sacredness. How? When we choose to orient towards it. The thing about reality, again, it's not going to say, hey, look at me, I'm holy and sacred. It's just what it is. And so we can go unnoticed. That which is holy and perfect and divine can go completely unnoticed because it's the only thing that is. And so the gift and the blessing of the Neptune archetype in our life, if you really, really look at it, is to open our eyes, orient ourselves, become receptive to see and to know the holiness of life. And so here I am. There's already a sense of intimacy, right? Like I'm standing here, I'm aware of the cars to my left and to my right. And right now there's a feeling of we're here together. But how many of these people in their cars are just sitting in this sense of isolation and aloneness? And how often do we move through life with this sense of isolation and aloneness? And what do we have to do to move beyond that isolation? It's not necessarily anything. There's a beautiful prayer that I'm learning about on my own journey, and the prayer can express in many ways. But it's basically a, you show me how to look at this, right? I am here to see the truth, to know true peace, to see what this actually is, to see who this actually is. You reveal the truth to me. And what's implied in that is a certain sense of spaciousness, where we're not going to take things as things and hold them in these boxes. It's such a tragedy in a sense that life is bigger than what we tend to think of it. It's like this physical reality is a tip of the tip of the tip of the tip of the tip of an iceberg, which itself is just the tip of another iceberg, right? The wholeness of reality is so much, I can't even qualify it with the word more than just what we see. And how do we find that, right? So prayer is this one expression that comes up in Neptune, but it's that prayer where we're not, help me, do something for me. It's this real sincere, like you're standing in front of someone and you say, can you help me with this? Right? Like you're talking to someone and you say, hey, Joe, I have this question. Can you help me with this? Maybe you have an insight. I was thinking of this thing on my walk today and I haven't quite figured it out. Maybe you have some insight. That is how we can pray to Creator. We can offer that in our heart. You know, have you ever pulled a tarot card or done an I Ching reading? There's this thing about reality that it's incredibly responsive to what we put out there. I mean, have you ever thought about that? If you've ever done any kind of form of divination, you could silently ask a question and pull a card and experience a profound relevance to what you're asking about. You can do that with I Ching, with tarot, with anything actually. You can do that without a fixed object and just be like, here's what I want to learn. The intelligence of the oneness is omniscient and fully aware. It's deeply caring and present to the most minute details and aspects of our own being. Nothing is ignored, everything's relevant. And so there's something that shifts when we orient ourselves beyond our self-enclosed isolation of just being in our own mind and thinking that we know what everything is, to a beseeching and an opening and a receptivity to learn, to discover, to see. So Neptune moving direct is the opening of that. For much of this year, for about half of this year, Neptune's been in this retrograde journey, which is this process of disillusionment. It's also squared Jupiter during much of this phase, and it's still squaring Jupiter, but it's kind of moving beyond that actually. No, Jupiter's just beyond that right now. But the sort of the cosmic curveball, right? Disillusionment and things not exactly being what we expected it to be. But there's a lot of learning and healing where it's like, okay, life is showing us its way. This is the unfolding. This is where we are right now. And any notion that we hold within ourselves of other than perfect, other than the most beautiful and ideal, divine and holy moment, is where we create our own suffering. And this doesn't mean to be all positive thinking about it and be like, this is perfect. It means becoming curious about right now, right? Becoming curious, like what is happening right now? What is now all about? What's true right now? It's only possible when we're open to suspend our disbelief for a moment. So this Neptune stationing direct is sort of like this wisdom to glean. There's insight, there's inspiration. And what comes to me to share is also, we often live our lives in this futility or hopelessness. Like, yeah, there's nothing special for me here. I'm gonna live a mundane life and, just sort of go with the flow and do what I'm expected. And Neptune says we all have dreams. There's this deep innocence inside of us that when we're children, for most of us, and maybe all of us at a certain point, we are connected to that dream where the imagination is active. We see possibilities, This little 6-year-old boy that I'm living with believes in some sort of tooth fairy. And to him, that's like not weird. Like believing in the tooth fairy is just as normal as believing in, dinner. Before we learned what's normal, what's not normal, we have such an openness. And in that openness, there's actually a lot more receptivity to miracles and divine guidance and living in reality as it actually is. So there's an invitation now to return to an innocent and a dreaming, a possibility for our life that we know, that only we can know deep inside of ourselves is possible. And it's not about pretending, as if you're playing some kind of fantasy game, but it's really turning our heart to that, because no one's gonna give us permission to move in the direction of our dreams. No one's gonna say, yes, you have permission to create the life around what you love most, that your deepest dreams for what it's like to be here are possible. We have total permission to love and to do what we love and to live as love and to give from our love. And where we think that our love and the love that we are is separate from the life that we have to live, that's where the path is. That's that juncture where there's an opening for inquiry, right? Where we get to examine how can love thrive here too? How can my love thrive here too? And that leads the way. So there's great generosity in this time in Neptune moving direct if we are to embrace it. And thank you. Much love to you all. So I'm gonna go inside and maybe sing. If I wasn't so cold, I would maybe I'll open up my doors and put some blankets around me so I can play guitar. And maybe some people will join me. Who knows? There's such a blessing and in having that freedom to love, because that's our choice to do so. It's because it's what we are. And that's where we can be an embodiment of generosity, an embodiment of freedom. So I received a song recently. I'll share it right now. I'm gonna put you on hold for one moment. The purpose of your life is to live it. Live your life. The purpose of your life is this moment. Live your life. Hum da da dum dee dee dee. Hum da da dum dee dee day. Hum da da dum dee 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 day. Hum da da dum dee dee dee. Hum da da dum dee dee day. Hum da da dum dee 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 day. The purpose of your song is to sing it. Sing your song. The purpose of your song is to sing it. Sing your song.